Welcome to our webinar on talent. My name is Lora Cecere and I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and this is part of our monthly webinar series. We've been doing these webinars monthly over the 6 years of the company's history, each month picking a topic and sharing research, and often we ask for panels of professionals to share their perspective. But today I'm going to share 3 pieces of research and drive a dialogue. We will be recording this webinar and sharing the slides on YouTube and on SlideShare. Feel free to share the slides with your groups and send us questions. Also, as we go along, I'd love to have a dialogue with the group. Put your questions in the question area, and I will take your questions as we go along. So our focus today is talent. Talent, I think, is the missing link in the supply chain as we think about digital transformation and preparing for Supply Chain 2030. Today I'm going to talk about why and what you can do about it. So here's a little bit about me. I'm a social scientist. I use the LinkedIn group that follows me of 290,000 people to basically do research on supply chain. It's independent, I share it freely, and I look at what can we learn from the past to really think about the future for the business leader. So I write for the Supply Chain Leader, I write on Forbes, I write on my blog on the Supply Chain Shaman, and I write on LinkedIn. And I'm always trying to triangulate the market to help people to drive improvements in supply chain. My worldview is that I don't think we have best practices. Instead, I think we have functional practices that are very siloed, and the walls of the silos hold us apart, and we have been developing talent within these silos. So manufacturing career paths, or procurement career paths, or distribution career paths, or sales procurement paths. And what we see is the need for leaders that have not only cross-functional experiences, but also cross-country experiences, and the need for diversity of backgrounds, the need for diversity and understanding across functions, and the need for understanding across geographies. And as we look at today's supply chain, only 1/3 of companies feel that today's supply chain is working well, and 56% believe that there's room for improvement. But most companies don't know what to do to unstick the supply chain, to drive it towards a more agile and aligned supply chain, and to be more proactive and to embrace new technologies. And I'm going to advocate in this webinar that rethinking talent is a good first step for us to drive this kind of step change that we need as we think about the next decade and we think about the unprecedented change and shifts in technologies that are available to us to drive new levels of value. So we're going to talk about 3 topics. The first topic is the Center of Excellence. When moving on talent, many companies will build a Center of Excellence, and the Center of Excellence is usually found in global companies. 1/3 of companies have a Center of Excellence, and about 50% of the Centers of Excellence are rated as effective. Now, there are 3 issues that we find with Centers of Excellence. One is when a Center of Excellence is really focused on an audit function, they will often not be able to move forward. So a Center of Excellence really has to work on serving the business and can be best measured by pull, or the amount of pull that the business has for the Center of Excellence. Secondly, to have an effective Center of Excellence, you have to define what excellence means. And we only find that 10% of companies are clear on the definition of supply chain excellence in metrics. Most companies measure functional metrics, measure too many metrics, and are not aligned around a balanced scorecard and a clear definition of excellence. And third, the Supply Chain Center of Excellence is a natural place for talent development, for creation of career paths, for creation of jobs, to work with HR around supply chain excellence, and most companies don't take advantage of that. So 49% rate their Center of Excellence as effective. Sometimes the Center of Excellence becomes academic, out of touch, And when this happens, then, we are not able to really drive goodness. But in companies that have an effective center of excellence, those that have an effective center of excellence are able to drive better alignment. So if you remember when I talked about that 1/3 of companies believe their supply chains are working well, alignment is one of the issues. And alignment between finance and operations is usually a major issue because finance thinks that the supply chain should be very efficient, lowest cost per unit, not really understanding the role of inventory and form and function of inventory. When there's effective supply chain center of excellence, there is a good dialogue or better dialogue with finance around buffers and decoupling points and what's needed for inventory. Also, as we look at operations and IT, there's better alignment, manufacturing and finance, because we're able to drive a more holistic view of what is excellence across the supply chain. The other thing is when we look at the center of excellence and we look at the elements of a center of excellence, talent management has the greatest gap, but is seen as the most important. So 83% of companies surveyed said that the development of talent was the most important, but has the largest gap. And talent strategy in terms of training, skills, movement, career paths is a topic that most companies struggle with. The second is on data and the use of data. So we haven't figured out the best approach. In fact, most companies are still struggling with what do I do in terms of the development of talent. Now, when we look at the characteristics of the center of excellence of importance versus performance, we can see that they do a better job on the what: supply chain network design, supply chain planning, demand planning, setting goals. But new talent development, supply chain innovation, and new technology evaluations are struggles for the group. It's important, but of lower performance. And the reason is that they are not really embracing what they can do in talent. So we're going to talk about talent and employee satisfaction and what we can learn from the last decade. Supply chain management was defined in 1982 as the process of source, make, and deliver. And we're now on the baby boomers retiring, a major shift in supply chain talent with the growth of millennials and Gen X. And when we look at job satisfaction, we find that baby boomers, vendors, technology providers, and academics are the most satisfied, and that Generation X and millennials are the least satisfied. And they're lower satisfaction when they're working in manufacturing, which is a problem. As we think about how do we embrace new ways of working for new generations, we have an opportunity with innovation and being able to put people on teams to be able to spark new ideas, to be able to drive higher levels of satisfaction. Most of the Gen X and millennials are disenfranchised because their personal lives look much different than their business lives, and that they have easier access to data and ability to get decisions made versus, what they see in the back office and their offices. Also, when companies allow talent to have a balance of remote and office jobs, and it's usually equal, you can see that there's higher levels of satisfaction. So there's a need for us to look at how do we improve Gen X and millennial job satisfaction and to be able to drive better satisfaction in manufacturing and distribution sectors. Now, why does it matter? Well, last year we looked at the correlation of 9,000 responses in our quantitative database and 15 years of financial data. And we tried to find the correlations, anything that was able to show a pattern. And when a company believed that the supply chain was working well, there was an improvement on cost of goods sold versus peer group. 158 companies that believed that their supply chain was working well, there was an improvement of cost of goods. And when the company was better at managing supply chain talent versus the peer group, in other words, more of the employees were ranking satisfied versus their peer groups, there was a significance in improvement in operating margin, profit margin, and EBITDA. So cost management became much better when there were more satisfied employees. And often talent is seen as a cost, not as an investment. And so, it gets back to high performance team management and really embracing talent as an asset. When there was an effective supply chain center of excellence, we saw much better focus on improvement and the ability to drive improvement better than the peer group. And when companies were able to get at supply chain costs, they were struggling to, move EBITDA as a percentage with quarterly growth. One of the issues is that many times supply chain costs were functional costs, not total costs. Only 29% of companies can get at total cost. And so functional costs in a vacuum will not help you to drive total cost. In fact, total costs need to be driven like a decathlete actually walking into the Olympic Stadium for decathlon. We can't just look at functional costs, which in many organizations, supply chain costs are logistics and customer service. We have to look at total cost. So satisfied employees drive better results. And if a company believes that the supply chain is working well, then they will have better cost. Now, most companies have talent programs for entry-level employees and what they consider to be high potential. But the biggest issue is in middle management level. These are senior managers and directors. As baby boomers are leaving the workforce, we're starting to get a job vacuum that's moving people quicker into senior management director roles. And there's a need to really train them and to be able to give them latitude and freedom and support for the organization as they fill new shoes. And most companies lack a holistic program to do this. They're only focused at the entry level or the executive level. Now, as we go along, I really would love to have your questions. So, if you have any questions for me, please put them in the chat box. But one of the things I've been working with companies on is how do we build middle management talent? How do we help middle management talent to get the right experiences, to feel empowered? And part of the opportunity is with digital transformation, being able to place middle management talent into innovation groups to be able to drive and spark innovation with new technologies and to be able to drive higher levels of value. So we can't just look at recruiting or entry level. We've got to look holistically. And we also have to think about the challenges. So most companies struggle with the lack of training on next generation supply chain thinking. What is an outside-in process? How do I think about Hadoop and open source and schema and read to really redefine planning? What is supply chain visibility? And how do I really drive network and networks to be able to build value chains? How do I drive effective analytic strategies so that I can use streaming data? These are all questions that most clients struggle with, and there's not the level of training for next generation supply chain leaders to really think about this more holistically. New forms of data don't fit well into old traditional architectures, and so we have to really rethink the past, to unthink what we've done, to relearn, to really focus on the next generation skill development, because streaming data architectures and the ability to get data as we need it through the cloud is very different than batch architectures. And batch architectures have really defined supply chain planning. As we are dealing with streaming data, we have to ask ourselves questions like, do we need orders? And as we deal with the redefinition of sensor data and telematics, then we have the ability to have software bots to be able to really drive the deductions. But this kind of next generation supply chain thinking can only happen if we can empower the Gen X and millennials in new innovation and not constrain them by IT standardization and a focus on traditional vendors. Now, finding employees with the right skills or experience, I was at a client the other day and they're like, we just can't find them. And I'm like, I don't think you can find them. You've got to build them. You've got to build them through training. You've got to build them through experience. You've got to build them through leadership support. And you've got to really have leaders that encourage the team to embrace new ways of thinking and working. As we think about digital innovation, many of the pilots that we're doing will struggle, and maybe we will have to fail forward because we will not be able to get certain technologies to work. This is so counter to traditional thinking. Employees really struggle with the fact that failure and learning on new technologies is part of the journey. Most companies want a well-defined ROI with a well-defined project plan, and as we think about new technologies and we think about test and learn and fail forward, that is very, very difficult at a change management level for employees to really embrace, and requires really focusing on that up front and making sure that employees feel comfortable, that they're going to test and learn and fail forward, that they're in an environment with leaders that allow them to do that, and that they're going to use that as part of training. So the companies that are doing the best in building next generation supply chain thinking have 5 characteristics. 1, they have a clear supply chain strategy, and innovation is part of that strategy. 2, they have funding for the evolution and next generation supply chain thinking, and they bring the Gen X and millennials into those diverse groups to be able to test and learn and fail forward, and they're very active in the development of that work. 3, they have stage gate processes that allow the evolution of those next generation supply chain processes, sort of like in product management where you've got stage gates that allows the organization to learn and grow as they test on this next generation supply chain thinking. 4, they work hand in hand with best of breed providers who are working on innovation, understanding that best of breed providers are not as large and as nimble as perhaps some of the larger vendors, but they tend to be more innovative. And 5, they focus on small pilots and they grow from the pilot to a larger deployment. And as they do that, they question the status quo. Because many of the technologies that we have are legacy, and many of the concepts that we've had for many years are legacy and have to really be rethought. Now, as they go along on this journey, of course, they have problems incorporating technology and software. The ones that do it the best have strong support from the leadership team. And most of the time, companies struggle with work-life balance for employees. Employees that are very high energy, very focused on innovation, tend to throw themselves out of balance. Employee turnover is an issue because the market is heating up for supply chain talent. In fact, I've steadily watched the market for planners grow. When I first was an analyst, it was about 4 months to get a supply chain planner. Now it's about 10 months, and the salaries have been commensurate with the time to get a planner. And there was always an assumption that if you needed a planner, you could just go to the market and get one, but not so much now. And the planners that you have will be heavily courted by others. So as you think about this in terms of the challenges, also think about the fact that supply chain is a changing business model that really requires talent. And the potential shifts as we look at 2030 is we will move from EDI teams, the teams that work on document management, the passage of documents across value networks, to network of network managers, really looking at supply chain operating canonicals and the supply chain operating networks and blockchain, multi-tier finance, and redefining value networks. We'll move from master data management as we know it today to data and rule wranglers. So what do I mean by that? Well, this traditional supply chain operates with single ifs to single thens for rules, but as we move to learning systems and ontologies will have many ifs and many thens, and we'll have ontologies that will be built for ATP and allocation and ontology specialists and data and rule wranglers that will really be looking at how do I wrangle data out of data lakes, and how do I write schema and read, and how do I manage the rules. We'll move from reporting and IT, focus on traditional reporting generation, to robot supervisors and software robots and the programming of software bots that allow the business leaders to drive their own reports through visual analytics. We'll move from Excel ghettos, which 68% of all planning today is done in an Excel ghetto, to really cognitive learning and ontology specialists. An ontology specialist is usually someone that's come out of the language arts, that understands the semantics of text and the semantics of data, and the focus will be on data portability, not necessarily integration. We'll move from order management, where people manage orders, to customer care specialists, and people will look at cost to serve and deductions and inventory matching much differently. And from forecasting, where we're looking at time phase data, where we think that each of the pieces of data is a number, to looking at the probability of demand and demand insights. So these potential shifts require us to think more holistically about data that moves at the speed of business, and to rethink some of our traditional roles and to move more skills for data management into business. And so as companies look at how do they hire, getting these data skills is important, and thinking about what's required in some of these future job descriptions of how do we have a robot supervisor, and what is a rule wrangler for things like ATP and allocation and order inventory matching and routing for supply chains, and how do we build the network of networks and actually work on blockchain and node design to be able to drive these future shifts. Because driving a digital transformation is a wonderful opportunity for us to focus on new outcomes. One of the issues for McCormick is for them to sell spices, people have to know how to cook. And so one of the outcomes that they focus on is not just selling spices now, but selling meals and selling prepared meals. Safeway, in a similar way, is focused on, meal delivery at home. Automotive is focused not just on selling cars, but selling rides. Apple put 1,000 songs or 1,000,000 songs in our pocket, depending upon what generation. We never thought about media and home entertainment like it could be today. So as we focus on outcomes, we focus on, things like how do we move from efficient sickness to health and wellness? How do we move from traditional modes of selling products to selling services? And how do we drive new outcomes through digital transformation? And we've never had an opportunity in my lifespan. I've been an industry analyst for 15 years. I built software for 12. I worked as a business leader for 25. We've never had the confluence of new technologies that are happening to the degree that we're seeing now. So we're dealing with open source analytics, things like Hadoop and Apache Spark and Kafka, that allow us to really have data that's much more accessible, much more portable, transforming our ability to get data in a way that we can't have through relational databases and some of the traditional architectures. Blockchain, which allows us to do things like cold chain and lineage, and to be able to do multi-tier finance, streaming data, which allows us to redefine vendor-managed inventory, sensor data, telematics data, 3D printing, which is an opportunity for us for prototypes or for agile supply chains and manufacturing, or to be able to redefine spare parts. Robotics, whether it's software bots or the physical robots, which allow us to have more autonomous supply chains. Wearables and mobility, which combine the portability of humans with data. cognitive computing, which allows us to sense, learn, and act. The traditional supply chain has not sensed, it's only responded. And so as we think about the digital supply chain and we think about the dissatisfaction of Gen X and millennials, there's an opportunity for us to power energy into building the digital supply chain and rethink the atoms and the electrons of the supply chain and the confluence of the new technologies. The mistake is that we try to make today's solutions more digital, because 95% of companies today are stuck at the intersection of operating margin, inventory turns, growth, and return on invested capital. And we have this confluence in new technologies and opportunities which are growing, which allows us to drive greater value, not just digitizing data or driving digitalization. So digitizing just says I'm going to take the signals and make them digital and put today's processes on steroids. Digitalization is I'm going to improve the workflow. Maybe I'm paperless, maybe I'm touchless, but I'm going to make this process better through digitalization. But digital transformation allows you to step back and to really question the atoms and the electrons of the supply chain in new ways. And to be able to do that, you need talent. And you know, how to get started? Well, you know, I'm watching lots of companies do this in different ways. One way is an overlay team reporting to the SVP of supply chain. An example of a company doing this is Corning, and I think Corning's doing this very well, where they're questioning the outcomes and they're looking at how do they bring a diversity in teams to really question the outcomes. And Laura Bismeyer and her team are working with many divisions within Corning to do this. A small focus group based upon design thinking with a focus on a business problem is a technique that Sandeep Dalani is doing at Mars, and I recently posted a podcast of Sandeep talking about design thinking. And the focus on design thinking allows us to put ourselves in the shoe of the business user and to not be so limited on existing processes and technologies, but to really rethink based upon what is the need of the current state and what could happen with new technologies. Schneider Electric has been doing a program called Scuba Teams under Annette Clayton and Murad to look at small focus groups based upon a business problem. So in this case, diverse teams are focused on a problem, and they're taken out of their roles and they're allowed to go deep, which is why it's called a scuba team, to really solve the business problem. And some companies are so serious about this, they actually form a new company. ZX Ventures, which is a spin-off of InBev, is an example of this. And then some companies are doing it through the IT group. Now, based upon my observation and my research, the worst place to do this is with an IT group. What I do find is that when there's an enlightened leadership and it's led by the business, and there's a focus on design thinking and business fundamentals where the projects are funded and they're allowed to focus on a business problem. You don't ever want to just focus on technology, and you don't want to focus on digital for the sake of digital. Instead, you want to solve a problem. So as we think about the building of teams to be able to drive digital innovation, we find, and this is based upon our observations, we did a recent conference on this, and we've been studying organizations for our new book that we're writing. The IT teams are the least successful, and the reason why the IT teams are the least successful is that most of the time these teams will actually use digital innovation as a new buzzword to do the project that didn't get last year completed, or to do an IT upgrade. Also, we have traditionally focused on software versus data, and so as we do digital transformation, the focus on data and data architectures allow us to really step outside the box, and if we do not hinder the group by force-fitting it into existing technologies, we can often find that we can drive much lower cost solutions using new forms of data, and perhaps use this ERP and APS architectures as systems of record because they don't naturally support these new forms of data. The other thing is, as we work with these teams are fragile, they're uncertain, and it's a very different working environment. And as we test new technologies, we'll fail, but we have to manage the change management environment to allow people to fail forward. And teams don't want to fail, so this is really uncomfortable. So I was at a session the other day with Laura Bismeyer from Corning, and she said, one of the things that worried her at the program she was working with was they weren't failing enough, and they looked at her strangely like, you want us to fail, but if you're not failing, then you're probably not moving forward. And design thinking helps to allow people to understand the business problem. Disparate groups do better than single generation focus. I say mix the gray hair with millennials and Gen X. A mistake I see a lot of companies doing is they'll take a focus of millennials to drive digital innovation, or Gen X versus mixing the groups. Diversity is really important. The other problems I see are around finance. Don't allow the teams to provide funding, whether it's a Shark Tank or a stage gate process, a way that funding can translate to scalability. Set up that governance early on so that the teams don't feel disenfranchised. And in the test and learn, don't force an ROI. Just like you don't force an ROI on new product development, this is new process development. And then along the way, network with others. Learn how others are testing and learning, learn how new technologies are working for others, and get out into the industry and network with others. We do several networking groups, the Network of Networks on blockchain, a demand share group on cognitive computing, and then we do monthly calls on the Shaman Circle to allow people to network with each other. And we think that that's really important as we get to next generational thinking. The focus needs to be on outside-in processes, versus today the processes are very inside out. They're really about the four walls, whereas if we are outside in, then we're more focused on value networks and multi-tier processes. And then our ability to embrace multiple data forms. So whether it's streaming data or data lakes, data needs to stream, needs to pull, and needs to be enabled to move and drive decisions in different ways. And embracing unstructured and structured data. So we got to get out of the Excel ghettos, and then embracing open source analytics, which allows us to be much more scalable, to use unstructured and structured data at lower cost, and to be able to do that. But to do this, we need data wranglers and rule wranglers and people that understand data, new forms of analytics. And our shifts need to be to sense before we respond, and building the trust in the autonomous supply chain for localized processes. So with that, I'd love to have some questions. Our talent is forecasted to be short 15% for 2030. I was talking to the Department of Labor at a conference the other day, and they said, well, Laura, what would be your recommendation? And I said, brand owners need to work with academics in all levels, whether it's community colleges teaching students how to receive a bill of lading, or what an ASN is, or how to ship a truck. We don't have enough people that are skilled in the warehouse. Starbucks has been a leader in this by working in inner cities to be able to drive an understanding of high school students and programs or community colleges. We also need to have partnerships with technology companies on data and learning data, and much more work around analytics, and get past the pretty PowerPoints to be able to work with analytics and analytics groups. One of the frequent discussions on the Shaman Circle is that data scientists sometimes think they know all the answers without knowing supply chain, and supply chain professionals are not willing to invest enough time in learning some of the new forms of analytics. So we need programs that allow people to learn from each other. And we need leadership that doesn't box us into yesterday's solutions. So getting there is, easier said than done. But one of the problems is we're going to have 10 to 15 too few people for 2030, and we're going to have brands that are going to drive higher value with digital innovation, and so we'll see a greater stratification of people that are able to do new things versus people that run today's traditional processes. So I have a question around building teams in China and India and Brazil. I find that companies that work on cross-country movement and also skill development do better. Heinz used to have a wonderful program where they would actually take a functional area like procurement or manufacturing, and they would have virtual learning around best ideas. So people would submit their ideas, and they would have a learning week. Schneider Electric does something similar where they'll have a learning week and a learning program that's online. I also recently participated for one with BASF. And so the more we can work on online learning and cross-country learning through sharing of ideas and movement of employees to the degree that we can afford it, the better. We need to understand those markets. I have a question around the network of networks and how to get involved in that. The network of networks is a cross-company share group that we facilitate that is testing with technologists and business leaders on blockchain and cognitive computing and supply chain operating networks that looks at how do we build interoperability between value networks. We have a session in Antwerp on the 21st of this month in November, 21st and 22nd. Just send me an email if you're interested. There is no cost to join, but it's very focused on the European pilots that we're doing on blockchain and looking at multi-tier finance with the banks through blockchain and the feasibility of that. And then we have a pilot in North America where we're working on onboarding for suppliers and contract management for bill of materials and lineage. And that next meeting will be in February at InBev's offices in Chicago. And so if you're interested in participating in that, sometimes this will help companies to get started in areas that they don't know. Well, thank you for joining our webinar today. We will be posting this on YouTube, and we'll also be posting the slides. And I just want to leave you with a couple of comments that we must learn from the past to unlearn to relearn. As we drive new forms of talent and we unleash the imagination of disenfranchised employees, we've got to give them a palette to really drive innovation. And what got us here is not the answer for the future, and we need to be able to really take that middle management talent and supply chain centers of excellence and be able to drive not just an audit function, but innovation and alignment to be able to look at how do we drive new outcomes. Innovation makes much of what we have today in supply chain legacy, and moving forward takes courage and focus on talent. We've invested, 2 decades in ERP and ERP architectures and traditional forms of reporting, and walking away from that and saying that it's legacy requires courage. But as we do that, the opportunities are great. And we thank you for engaging with us. You can find us online at Supply Chain Insights. I write a blog at Supply Chain Shaman. And we do have an online learning program that we're starting in January, which is a cross-company cohort, which allows organizations to put 2 people for online learning to learn some of the concepts that I talked about today into a cross-company academy. It's an online program that we've built with CorpU, and we'd love to have anybody that's interested join us. And then we also do boot camps internally within companies to try to stir innovation ideas. Thank you very much. Until next time, this is Laura.